He has been clear that he wants an early foreign policy victory, and this is essentially it. So tomorrow at the inauguration, we sure as can expect for the president-elect in his inauguration address to be stating how he was able to bring about a deal that no one else could. The Israeli hostages are now going home because of me. No one can make a deal like I can. Everyone's familiar with his rhetoric. We all could probably get together and write his speech and get it about 90% correct before he gives it, right?
Welcome, Matt. Welcome again. Thank you so much for joining me again in this second part of the episode that we started a week ago, actually. And today we are the 19th of January. So tomorrow is the inauguration of Mr. Trump. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But what was interesting last time is that you ended the interview talking about how Israelis were thanking you. They were like I guess thanking Trump indirectly and saying make America great again and encouraging you to vote Trump or whatever. But what happened just in the last week, since a week ago, I think many of those Israelis now kind of regret what they were thinking and saying back then. So what you had to comment on that, and what can you tell us about the ceasefire in Gaza, how you see it, and more broadly, because it's very related to that. How do you see the Trump administration? I know it's a difficult question; it's difficult to guess what's going to happen, but from what you can see so far. How is the Trump administration going to behave in terms of imperialism?
Oh, I think they'll just be this Trump administration will just be a different form of imperialism. They believe in the empire. The Trump is an emperor, as we discussed last week, right? When you switch out title president to emperor, it makes more sense in a lot of ways. And Trump sees the world differently than Biden did, than Obama did, than the Democrats do, or that many Republicans do. He wants to remake it because he feels there's a need to do so. It doesn't mean he's giving up on it. Doesn't mean he's going to surrender any parts of it. Doesn't mean he's going to be as bad or worse than his predecessors. It just means that he views the world differently and wants and thinks there's opportunity for improvement. And now, as you know, with many authoritarians, oligarchs, fascists, presidents, whatever you want to call him, there's always that desire for personal benefit. And corruption is nothing unique or new to any governmental system, including empire. And so the idea that can be an emperor, have your obligations to upholding the maintenance, the preservation, and the expansion of the empire, but still looking out for yourself first, that works, right? That's possible for those both of those things to exist, and that's what we have in Donald Trump. You have someone who is going to uphold the obligations of the empire, as every successive as every previous administration has, and at the same time, he's going to be looking for the he's going to be looking to enrich himself and others, his colleagues, his friends, his cronies, etc. What we had happen last week, and again, we're talking today. It's Sunday morning, my time, East Coast, United States, January 19th. So the ceasefire has just begun just several hours ago. Actually, before I got online, able to see some video from Gaza. You couldn't really make out too much what was happening, but it was looking like Hamas was transferring the three Israeli hostages to the Red Cross, as well as they had showed video of Al Jazeera showing video of buses outside of Ofer prison waiting to take approximately 100 Palestinian prisoners and release them. So excuse me. What happens? This seems to be clear. It doesn't seem like it's one story that just kind of got out of hand and circulated and spread. It seems to be pretty correct because we're hearing it from Israeli sources, American sources, Arab sources, all throughout the Arab world, including the Qataris, who, of course, are the ones who are the who hosted and were the mediators for the ceasefire agreement for the last 15 months. That Donald Trump's envoy, Stephen Witkoff, who is not a diplomat, has, as far as I know, no government experience of any kind. He's a real estate developer, now a very successful and prominent real estate developer, but a real estate developer. And the story is, and again, this seems to be the case. This is what's been confirmed over and over again by multiple sources in multiple countries that Witkoff showed up and he demanded that the Israelis meet Trump's demands to have a ceasefire by the time of the inaugurations, and the Israelis folded. That Netanyahu folded. There's a story, a very popular story, that Witkoff shows up on last Saturday. That of course is a Sabbath, so the Jewish holy day, and he says, "I need to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu," and he's told the Prime Minister is not available. It's a Sabbath, and Witkoff said, "I don't care. He's going to meet me when I get into Jerusalem," and supposedly he did. And we don't know what the carrots or the sticks were that were put forward. A lot of the assumption is that Trump would allow this or that, but they were always going to allow that, and the Biden administration was allowing that. So what were the sticks that may have motivated Netanyahu to finally do this? Now, the ceasefire deal, it does come at a juncture and at a point where it makes sense strategically and operationally for the Israelis to take a pause now. In this, you have this situation in Syria. You have the situation in Lebanon. Of course, we have 2 weeks remaining in that ceasefire, roughly 2 weeks. No, less than 2 weeks, actually, I guess, remaining in that ceasefire. And you have a situation with Iran where Iran is checked, essentially. I think we spoke about this the last episode. So it makes sense for the Israelis to capitalize on the moment they have to get their hostages back, and it makes sense for Netanyahu to get that political victory. So you have operational, strategic, and political reasons why the Israelis benefit in some way from this ceasefire deal. The key thing about the ceasefire deal from the Israeli and the American perspective is it's temporary. And there's no commitment to anything further than this first phase. And the first phase is the exchange of hostages on both sides, resumption of humanitarian aid, as well as the Israelis are supposed to start pulling their forces out of Gaza. We've not seen anything that yet. Of course, it's too early to see anything like that. But the Israelis have already said, Netanyahu just said it on Saturday evening, last night, in an address, that we're not leaving the buffer zone that we built, this massive kilometers wide buffer zone all around Gaza, as well as the Philadelphia corridor, which is the boundary between Egypt and Gaza. We're not leaving that. They've already said that. And then when not the security cabinet, the full cabinet voted on Friday to approve the ceasefire deal, they tacked on a resolution at the end that said we will resume military operations, we will reoccupy Gaza, and we will take control of all humanitarian aid. And the way I read that, it wasn't conditional. It wasn't conditional of, look, if Hamas starts shooting rockets again at Tel Aviv or whatever, we're going to do this. It's read to me as we are going to restart this. We are going to go back in and take control and cut off humanitarian aid. And I think this is what Netanyahu is attempting to do here, is to play both, right? To be able to say, I've got the prison, I got the hostages back, and we are now going back to war, right? Placating both. I think you see the two most prominent far right ministers in his government, Benjamin, I mean, Itamar Ben Gavir, excuse me, the security minister, and Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister. Well, Ben Gavir quit the government. He also said, though, he said it's confusing what his plans are, because he did say something about how he wasn't going to vote against the government, but he did leave the government, did leave the coalition. But it's not really that important in the law, in the sense of the stability of the government, because Ben Gavir's party only has about 6 members in the Knesset, if I recall correctly. And Netanyahu, the Knesset has 120 members. Netanyahu's coalition has 68. Of course, you need 61 to have a government. And so Ben Gavir's party isn't enough. His Jewish Power Party isn't enough to bring the government down. Now, Bezalel Smotrich, his party has 13 members. And Smotrich has, while he voted against the ceasefire agreement, he's not left the government. And he is holding on until, if you do not restart this war, then I will leave the government. The government will collapse. There'll have to be elections. Whether or not Netanyahu would win in another round of elections, of course, have to see how things play out these next 40 some odd days. But you see the stunt, the political maneuvering and structuring of this to allow for Netanyahu to claim for both. You see Smotrich being a willing participant in this. I'm sure Ben Gavir is being allowed to do what he wants because it's good for him. It's right. I mean, like, and it causes no real problems from Netanyahu. Everyone is getting something out of this. And for Trump, the American columnist Chris Hedges, the author, I think he said it best the other day, that this essentially is a presidential inauguration bombing pause. That this is what Donald Trump has wanted. Donald Trump, it's been clear if you listen to him this last year, he wants an early foreign policy victory, whether it was Gaza, whether it was Ukraine, whether it is taking Greenland, whatever it was, he has been clear that he wants an early foreign policy victory, and this is essentially it. So tomorrow at the inauguration, we sure as can expect for the president-elect in his inauguration address to be stating how he was able to bring about a deal that no one else could. The Israeli hostages are now going home because of me. No one can make a deal like I can. Everyone's familiar with his rhetoric. We all could probably get together and write his speech and get it about 90% correct before he gives it, right? I mean, we know what he's going to say. So I think that's it. I mean, and supposedly the Israelis have said that the United States government, both the Biden and the Trump administrations, have given assurances that Israel can begin again, that they can carry out the genocide at any time or place. It's up to them. And that's all they need, is just to say one excuse, just point to one thing, make something up, and then they'll renew it. And we'll see how far along it gets before that happens. I'm not confident it will make it through the full 42 days of this first phase. I'm not confident at all that we'll see a second phase. And I'm afraid, Mehdi, if we get back together and talk end of February, March, we'll be talking about the resumption of the war, genocide on Gaza, and the resumption of the problem is for the Israelis doing that. And I forgot, I didn't mention, that's probably the most important thing out of that cabinet resolution, was that they will settle Gaza, that they will resettle Gaza. That's going to be problematic, I guess, but maybe it's not problematic for the Israelis. The ceasefire deal allows for the Palestinians to return to their homes, including in the north. We'll see how much that's able to be carried out, how much the Israelis allow that. So the Israelis are serious about reoccupying and settling Gaza. They got to push everyone south out of the north again, which they'll do. I mean, they're not. Their concerns aren't about the health and welfare of the Palestinians, of course. It's just more of like they'd have to do it over again, right? And that seems like we've done all this already, and I think maybe that's some consternation among the Israeli sides. We have to repeat what we have done. But again, it gives the Israelis operational, allows the IDF to rest, refit, do maintenance, and reposition themselves. And all what I'm getting to, and I'm being very, very long-winded here, which is how I usually am. So no surprise to anyone who knows me. But this all gets to the idea that all of this has been supporting effort for the annexation of the West Bank. You saw last night in Netanyahu's speech, he spoke about that very briefly. He said that we are moving more military forces into the West Bank. And Yeah, so certainly that's what we're seeing here. The preparation for the coming few years as the Israelis not just annex the West Bank, I mean, but ethnically cleanse it, because that's something I think people understand. Those two things are interconnected. Annexation in a sense is just kicking the PA out, the Palestinian Authority out, and putting Israelis in charge of everything, and basically being the owners of the West Bank, not just de facto as they are, but de jure. But it also comes with this intertwined uh, 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 requirement for ethnic cleansing as well. And so I think that's what we'll be seeing in the next few years. So all the celebration over the ceasefire, it's understandable, but what's coming, I believe, is more horror.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with your analysis. Unfortunately, history shows, several centuries of history show that these Western imperial powers, when they seem like they're doing the right thing, it's because
Right.
they are yeah, they are scheming, and I mean they never do deals in good faith. We have seen this repeatedly for centuries.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it's good for Gazans, clearly. I mean, a break from genocide is always welcome, even if it will not be necessarily very long. But then, I mean, to your point that you made last week, you said that Israel wouldn't exist without U.S. support, and I think that Trump, even before even before his inauguration, I mean, he's not even officially president of the U.S. He managed to twist Israel's arm into agreeing to a ceasefire, right? So
Yes.
this kind of is proof enough for anybody who was doubting the fact that the U.S. Didn't have that kind of power over Israel.
Right. I mean, the thing that I think we have to be careful though with that is that there may have been carrots as well. And again, I mean, some of the carrots, as I said, were always going to happen. The Trump administration was always going to allow the Israelis to do what they want in the West Bank. They're always going to provide them with whatever military equipment, munitions that they want. The 2020, the memorandum of understanding that President Obama put into to place back in 2016. I guess it's 2015, 2016, so 10 years ago, is ending. A 10-year deal to provide the Israelis $38 billion, right? So that's $3.8 billion. That's what the United States gives as a baseline every year to Israel for military assistance. Perhaps that was part of it. Trump saying, hey, I'll make it five, I'll make it $10 billion a year. We don't know. The one that stands out for me that makes me afraid is was it, hey, look, Bibi, if you go along with this, you give me my victory for inauguration, then I will attack Iran for you. Right? I mean, that would be the ultimate trade-off. That would be the ultimate deal, because that's what the Israelis do want most of all, I think, is the United States to attack Iran, to do its bidding against Iran. And so was that maybe the deal that was made? We don't know. Or was it as it appears where Witkoff said, "You're doing this. Don't don't make us angry." This when Donald when President Trump said they'll be hell to pay, he didn't talk just about one group. He was talking about everybody. So don't make him angry. Maybe that was it. I don't know.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. But clearly, I mean, there was a deal. Probably they used the stick and the carrot. But then, I don't know what you think about it. But I mean, Israel was really in a very very bad situation, and still is. I mean, economically, it's a total disaster, and there's no way it will resume the same economic. I mean, the trade and everything with other countries as was the case before October 7th, because so many countries and people are so disgusted with it, they will never resume trading with it ever again. And so this is the economic aspect of things with investments and
Right.
everything. But
Yeah, and let me if I could make a comment on that because I was just there in November. I was in the West Bank. Our hotel was East Jerusalem. We spent almost all our time in the West Bank. But there was you could see the economic consequences there, the emptiness, like how quick it took to get through the border. The hotel we were staying in East Jerusalem, we were the first group to have been there in 10 months, and after we were leaving, they were closing again. We had a morning where we were supposed to meet some people in Jerusalem, Palestinians, and they couldn't get into Jerusalem, right? And so we had a free morning, and this was a beautiful morning in November, a lovely day. And so, okay, we got some time to sightsee. So we went to the Mount of Olives, and Mount of Olives on the big hill. South of the old city, just amazing, right? As well as the religious significance and everything else. We were the only group there for an hour. There was no one else there. There should have been thousands of people there, and the same thing, I've got a photo of me, that after the group ended, my delegation ended, I spent a day or two there by myself. And, same thing too, walking through the old city. It's vacant. It's empty. You go to the Western Wall and there's hardly anybody there. The last time I was at the Western Wall, it was 5 rows deep of people waiting for their turn to go up and pray, right? I mean, like in this, there was a handful, 5, 6 people, 5, 6 men over here, about the same amount of women over there. I mean, so you saw that the economic consequences, and of course, then if that's what's happening to Israel, then of course what's happening to Palestine, right? That deliberate strangulation, economic strangulation of the Palestinians as part of the occupation. Well, it's a lot worse. And for people to understand though why the Israelis think they can get through it, one, I think they believe, and probably rightly, unfortunately, that in a few years' time everything will go back to normal. Right. And they'll, right. I mean, and the way too, it's interesting, Mehdi, when you're there, of course, and you're visiting the Palestinians, there's no way you cannot see the occupation, right? There's no way you cannot see it. The military presence, the settlements, right? Just the reality of life. You cannot not see it. But the thing is, though, if you go there as part of, if you're an American, you go as part of like a Christian tour group, you will go, you'll fly into Tel Aviv, you'll take a bus to Jerusalem, you will go to Bethlehem, you'll go to Nazareth, you will never see the occupation because the bus routes for the tour groups are somehow able to avoid the Christian tourists from the United States and other parts of the world from ever even seeing the apartheid wall. It's more, so I think that's their plan is we're doing it already. We can get away with it again. And then the other aspect is the United States provides a loan guarantee for Israel. And this goes back really to the early 90s when Israel was resettling a lot of Jews from Russia, from the broken up Soviet Union. And the United States backed them with that. And that it continues to be in place. And this is essentially a guarantee that allows for Israel to issue bonds and debt without fear of default. And even as we've seen the credit rating agencies over the last 15 months degrade Israel, I think 5 times, they're still selling bonds as soon as they put them on the market. They've sold 400% more bonds than last year than they did the previous year. And this is how they're keeping their economy afloat because of that guarantee. So, I mean, there's all types of reasons. And then the other thing is with it is that, I think the point, I know you want to talk about Trump and what he sees, he wants his grand bargain, right? So he wants to get himself, and I've heard this talk a bit more in the last week, that he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. And whether he gets it for ending the war in Ukraine, or whether because he ends the war with the Palestinians, or because of a grand bargain in the Middle East, this is what he wants. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how well that goes. But the idea of a grand bargain is something I think that will be an obsession for this Trump administration, because I think they see it as a requirement to continue what they did their first term in terms of the Abraham Accords, and they want that. They saw the Democrats couldn't do it, and they want that. This will demonstrate that we really are. And again, that's what emperors are supposed to be able to do.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, the Israeli economy is in tatters, and there's also the military front because Israel didn't even win over Hamas on this very
Yeah.
small territory, which is Gaza. And they still opened another front in Lebanon with Hezbollah, which is an even greater entity, a lot more
Yep.
powerful than Hamas. And also they are occupying Syria,
Hmm.
and they are bombing jointly with the U.S. Of course, they wouldn't dare to go alone. They're bombing Yemen, and
Right.
Yemen is striking back.
Right.
So yeah, it seems I'm not a military expert, but it seems to me, and I've discussed this with other guests on this podcast, that the Israeli military was way overstretched.
Yeah.
So my question is, wasn't this ceasefire also very, very much in Israel's interest? And the arm twisting, the probable arm twisting, and the carrot, the carrot side of things that Trump has been using, didn't it just inject more rationality in an absolutely crazy regime under Netanyahu and all the other far right extremists? Wasn't this just a temporary, probably coming back to rationality, so that maybe very likely Israel will gather a little bit more power economically and militarily before it goes back to business as usual?
I think so. I agree with you. I mean, the need, I spoke before about the operational, strategic, and political benefits to Israel, this ceasefire, and didn't really touch on the operational. But, the Israeli army and Air Force have been conducting operations nonstop since October 7th, 2023. They need a break. Their aircraft need to be maintained. They need to be refitted. There's all types of things that when you're running operations like that, you put to the side and the equipment starts breaking down, right? And so they just need to take the time to fix their stuff, essentially, as well as to reposition themselves. I mean, all this. I think, we have the luxury of putting all this into different compartments and boxes, right? So we can put Syria in this box, Lebanon in this box. For the IDF, and don't mean please don't misunderstand me. I'm not being sympathetic to that genocidal army, but they do have the issue of, like, they have to deal with it all. And Lebanon isn't something the Hezbollah isn't something we put over here, and it's not connected to anything else. We're the ones who have to deal with Hezbollah. So as we see, because I think that ceasefire deal with Hezbollah goes until January 26th, I think, which is right, not even a week away at this point, a week away. And so they have to be prepared to maybe resume large scale operations against Hezbollah at that point. What's occurring in Syria, it appears stable, if you want to use that word for it, but it's really not. And the complexity of things there, the fact that there's still so much dust, that the Israelis have taken much more territory outside the Golan Heights, moved up along the Lebanese-Syrian border. That requires a resourcing that is not minimal. I mean, it's a serious, that alone should be the Israeli army's main effort or main priority, and it's not. It's number three, probably maybe four. Yemen, of course, they've been attacking more in the last several weeks. The Israelis targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, as we'd expect they would. We'll see. The Yemenis have said, "Hey, look, the ceasefire deal goes through. We're stopping our attacks." And so I expect that's what will occur, until the ceasefire deal stops, and then the Yemenis will resume their military action. And then, of course, so they are. It is the strain on the army has been clear. The army was talking about the strain back in the springtime before these operations with the full scale invasion of Lebanon, the wars. I mean, so it's been clear for almost a year now that the Israeli army is overstretched. So this pause is very significant and very important to them. And as well, too, if they have to reposition forces. And, we heard again, Netanyahu said that they're putting more forces into the West Bank. Whether that's actually what they're going to do, or Netanyahu is just is just throwing that out there to make it clear that I'm not forgetting about the West Bank and it's our priority. Uh, we'll see.
Yes, and I mean, people sometimes forget a few events from just a few months or years back, but just it was maybe 2 years ago. Both François Hollande, the former French president, and Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, German chancellor, they both said that the Minsk Accords, the Minsk agreements, there was two of them between Ukraine and Russia. So these agreements were supposed to be backed by France and Germany. They both said, François Hollande and Angela Merkel, that those agreements were just made to buy time for Ukraine, so that it will be ready for war with
Right.
Russia. So this is an example, yet another example of the good faith
Right.
of Western powers when it comes to peace agreements and things like that.
Right. Right.
Right?
Right. You even have the example in 38 of Munich. And, people, the conventional understanding of Munich is very critical. And that a deal made between the British and the Germans, it has been the crux of the crux of the argument for aggression on the part of the West, of the U.S. For the last 80 years, that Munich was a betrayal. Munich was weakness. If you give the other side, if you give the authoritarians, the autocrats, the dictators an inch, they'll take a mile. And then of course you're called Neville Chamberlain and things like that. The reality was what Chamberlain was doing was buying Britain time because the British were not prepared to go to war in 1938. I mean, that was clear. And so if you look at what occurs with the Munich Agreement, is that they knew war was coming and they had to buy time. And that's what the Munich Agreement was. And of course, that understanding is lost and it's repurposed. And the narrative now becomes one of weakness, of not standing up, et cetera, et cetera. And anyone who's followed American politics will know the Munich Agreement has been cited as the reason for American wars going back to the 50s. By the time in the Korean War, dealing with China, the desire to use dropping atomic bombs on China, Munich was cited then. So going back to the early 50s, it was already being used, and in my lifetime, I have heard it used for everything. But when the reality was, it was actually a smart move by the Brits to buy themselves time to prepare. And so I think in this case, it's for the Israelis, it is too. It gives them, even a ceasefire agreement only holds for 2 weeks. It gives them 2 weeks to prepare for what's next. Now, do the Israelis know what's next? We don't know, right? I mean, they come across as very confused, as making things up as it goes. Of course, their domestic politics is the most important thing in all this. So that's hard to predict. That's hard to understand, right? And their military policy, their strategy is going to be dictated by those domestic politics. So it's difficult to predict it. You can see the Israelis at some point, I believe, in the summer get their act together, right, and focus on Lebanon. And we have to take the axis of resistance apart one at a time. And that's essentially what they did, and quite effectively. Where the axis of resistance right now, the only ones still fighting are the Yemenis. And the axis has been broken in many ways, split apart. isolated, and it doesn't mean that they're defeated. Doesn't mean that we're going to hang up our axis, put the axis of resistance sign in a sign in a closet and not worry about it anymore. No, they're still there, and I think they're trying to figure out how to move forward. But certainly, the Israeli actions of the last 6 months for the Israelis have been very effective, and of course, it's been a horror show for the region and for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it's and Chris Hedges talked about this just a few weeks ago with one of his guests, and it was titled something like "Technology versus God." Because Israel has all this technology which comes essentially from the US and France and Germany and the UK, but what they don't have is fighters who have nothing to lose and who believe in their cause. They know their cause is just and they believe in it and they are ready to sacrifice for it, especially since they have been brought to a level where they have absolutely really nothing to lose anymore.
Yeah.
They've lost their families, have been destroyed, etc., etc. So it's God versus or technology versus God, and history shows that often God wins. If you
Yeah,
put
and
it like God, right?
I'll push back on it a bit because you do have within the Israeli army a good percentage of the settler class in it. And I think that's where we're seeing some of the dysfunction, some of the fragmentation, some of the friction in the Israeli army right now. You're seeing many reports of Israeli reservists saying they're not going back to their units. That very few of them are saying that, to be fair, very few of them are saying it's because I'm not going to take part in genocide. It's primarily because I'm exhausted. I'm losing my business because of this, right? You keep calling me back. I mean, so between my family and work and everything, I just can't keep doing this, as well as others, the policy-oriented ones. Just again, a week or so ago, about 200 reservists said, we're not taking part in this because the policy is wrong-headed. We can get the hostages back. You're refusing to do it. We're not taking part in this. So there is, but then on the other side of that, you have the settler class. And Seymour Hersh a couple weeks ago reported that 40% of the Israeli army officers come from the settler class. And you've seen that in the stories. You've seen that in the reporting. I think people are familiar with some of the more devastating articles that have come out of Haaretz, particularly the one in December that was published by a psychiatrist who works with the Israeli army. And you see that genocidal delight, right? The enjoyment of what is occurring there, the pleasure in killing the other, right? The fact that they have, particularly among the settlers, the dehumanization of Palestinians is so far gone. It's so imbued that it's like they're like children killing bugs. That's the same type of reality that we're witnessing there. And so you see that the issues within the Israeli army, personnel issues, that are causing problems. And it's not a unified, cohesive fighting force like it needs to be, even though you do have a good percentage of them who are religious fanatics who do believe that what they are executing is the divine will. And we have that here in the United States, of course, right? We just had last week Pete Hegseth being nominated, have his confirmation hearings for his nomination as Secretary of Defense. And he has all types of tattoos, as well as he's written about it, spoken about it, that are white Christian nationalist tattoos, white Christian nationalist beliefs. He has at least three tattoos that are tied to Christian militancy. He has the Jerusalem cross, which is what the Crusaders carried. He has on him as well the Latin quote Deus Vult, which is God wills it, which was the Crusader slogan. And then he also has the Cairo, which was the what Constantine had put supposedly, when God reveals himself to Emperor Constantine, or Jesus reveals himself to Emperor Constantine, this is what's put onto his shields, and they triumph in battle, and thus Christianity becomes the official religion of the empire, or so the story goes. Hegseth has a Cairo on him as well as God knows what else. So we have that type of religious militancy here in the U.S. And this is the idea that the American Secretary of Defense is someone who believes in the genocide of Gaza as being part of a divine plan, as being cosmically justified, as well as so many of these people are eschatological, right? They believe in the end of time. It's all about the end of days that are coming, and this is part of God's plan. And one of the things, maybe folks who are outside the U.S. Who maybe not be so familiar, there are what these Christian Zionists. There are 30 or 40 million Christian Zionists in the United States. Or maybe it's 20, it's between 20 and 40 million Christian Zionists in the United States. But anyway, there's more, the point is there's more Christian Zionists in the United States than there are Jews in the world. And their belief is that Israel is important because Israel needs to exist to allow for the prophecies of the Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, to come true. And so you see it in that sense of Israel, just essentially the Israeli Jews just being pawns to bring about the end of the world. But this is very troubling stuff.
Yes, and yeah, this guy and his confirmation are like a vindication for what Chris Hedges has been saying for years. And I think he wrote a book on Christian Zionists. I think it was called American Fascists or something like that.
Yeah, he did. Chris, yeah, he did. He spent
Yeah.
about 5 years ago, I think he put that book out. Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, but he spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah, so yeah, yeah, it's both troubling and also yeah, a confirmation of what Chris Hedges has been warning about for years now. Knowing that these same Christian Zionists, they're often anti-Semites because they are white
Yes.
supremacists and they hate everything which is not white Christian European
Right. Well,
European.
not only that, if the story works out for them, if things come as they expect they will, in those end times, the Jews will be given a choice, essentially convert or go to hell, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure how you profess a love for the nation of Israel when you believe that ultimately a divine gun is going to be put to their head and they'll be forced to either convert or go to hell. But yeah, no, they do. They do believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's. I mean we often talk about all the contradictions of the capitalist, imperialist, colonialist
Right.
project in this podcast, and this is one of them. And indeed, the Israeli colonizers are the useful idiots of these. Of these Christian Zionists. Yeah, I was glad you earlier talked about the all these Israeli soldiers which didn't want to go fight really because
Yeah.
they moved to Israel to occupy Palestinian territory because they wanted a good life, not to fight for anything really. Yeah, they want to enjoy life. And suddenly they were asked to go fight against people who had nothing to lose and who believed in their just cause.
Right.
And yeah, I mean it's horrifying, and many of these Israeli soldiers prefer to take the way out. I think everyone will understand what that means. Of course, YouTube's algorithms will uh, will kind of downgrade this video if I use the word the
Right.
S word, but everyone understands, and yeah, they've been choosing this way out rather than go fight in the Israeli army, and it allows me actually to switch to the next subject I wanted to ask you about, which is U.S. veterans,
Hmm.
We talked last time how they were used, how they are still used by the U.S. imperialism, which serves really at the end of the day just a very small number of people, the very very small number of elites who really benefit from this. Um, so these veterans, they are, like you said last time, they are, although many of them think they will be able to make a difference and do good and not go along with some practices and so on. But it's a system, and you cannot fight it. Right? That's what you said last time, and yeah, it will be stronger than you. It's like a structure, and if you put people in
Yeah.
that structure, they will have to behave the way structure wants, and very
Right.
very few of them, like you, will find the strength to really fight back and exit, and even yeah, like fight against this whole system as a new goal in life. But yeah, I mean, you as a veteran, you said last time, you I mean, it had a very deep effect on you, a very negative effect on your health, mental
Right.
health, among other. So what can you tell us about that, and particularly this injury, which is called moral injury?
Right.
So can you tell us about it? And yeah, and how many people are subject to it?
Okay, so moral injury is, and I appreciate you asking me about this, and it's not even an American phenomenon. You could see this throughout the world and throughout history. Homer writes about it, Shakespeare writes about it. It's probably best, maybe I should start off with if people remember Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and she, participates and kind of prompts the evil doing in that, right? But she doesn't actually do the murder. But remember, people recall she's got the blood on her hands and she can't wash the blood off her hands, right? That ghost blood, if you will, out, damn spot. That's essentially moral injury, right? Is the fact that you've transgressed, that you have done something or not done something, right? Because moral, you could stand back and not do anything, right? And that you did your transgression there. You see someone who needs help, you don't participate, and something happens to that person, and then the guilt you carry, right? Or the regret, the shame of not doing something. It's just as strong as if you did something yourself. And also directly or indirectly. So in Lady Macbeth's case, she didn't have the knife in her hand, right? She didn't do the murder, right? But, so it's this idea that we, as a species, have foundations within us individually that have formed through our collective existence. They are spiritual, they are moral, they are ethical, they are institutional, right? Cultural, right? It informs us who we are, and that builds our identity. And when you transgress that, when you do something that violates that, or again, don't do something, then that foundation event is ripped out. And it's in the form of guilt, regret, shame, which is an incredibly forcible cage that people live in. And so what occurs then in veterans is, in combat veterans I'm speaking about, is you go overseas, you take part in a war, you envision yourself as being the white hat, you envision yourself as being a liberator, and then you realize that's not what we were, right? There's also something beyond that, though, where in the sense that even if you are on the quote good side, it's the fact of taking another life. It's the fact of failing to preserve a life, maybe, right? That so rips out, again, those foundations, the identity of who you are. It's a sense of that for many people, when they think about these things, they envision what they would do, right? And so certainly for members of the military, just as say healthcare workers or firefighters or law enforcement, you have a vision that if something happens, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to fail. And then when you fail, well, okay, too, that identity is now poof, it's gone. The reality, though, is that extends beyond the ideas of good and bad. And that moral injury is just this idea of taking, particularly in a combat setting, the taking of lives. So we've seen it occur. We know it occurs, and it occurs on both sides. So you have a study, and it lasts a lifetime. This is not heartache. This is not the loss of a love, right? This is not a grief. This is not the grief that comes from a death or something like that, a failed marriage or what have you. This is something that is incredibly deep. It gets to the essence of us. It's existential, and you see that because in 2010, the state of California did a study, and it found that World War II veterans were killing American World War II veterans were killing themselves at a rate 4 times higher than their peers. So these are men who were in their late 70s and their 80s. This is what, 7, 8 decades after the war. This is a war where these men defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. This was the good war, if there ever was one, right? And all those decades later, these men in their 70s and 80s and 90s are killing themselves at rates 4 times higher than their peers. I mean, so you look at it too, whether the same thing occurs in Israel, the same thing occurs in Vietnam. The Vietnamese don't like to talk about it. The Vietnamese government censors this quite a bit. But if you talk to the Vietnamese, they will say, yes, we have this epidemic among our people, among those who fought the Americans, right? So if you think of any struggle that was more just, right? The national liberation effort of the Vietnamese, right? These are, even if you didn't start fighting until the early 70s, say you were of a line that had been fighting the French, then the Japanese, then the French again, then the Americans, struggling for doing what your grandfather, your father, your brothers had done, fighting for your liberation. And yet they're killing, they're losing their own, they're being killed by suicide in high numbers. And of course, for the Vietnamese government, this is something we can't talk about because this runs counter to the whole narrative and understanding of national liberation, which of course it was. But this is a black mark on that. So it becomes an issue as well then where you can't get it properly discussed or taken care of at governmental levels because it's politically untouchable. No government is going to say, look, our veterans are killing themselves because of what they did in the war. Because the narrative is always that the war was good, the war was just, the war was necessary. In the United States, the hero worship of the military, that dissonance that would exist of that, and so you have that as well as a driving force. So you have these men and women who come home from war. They've done things, they've taken part things, they're greatly unsettled by it. There's this dissonance in their head, though, because their society is telling them that they're heroes. So there is that aspect as well that further drives the distress, further infuriates the guilt, the shame, the regret within people. And this moral injury, and this is not anecdotal, this is not just speculation. We have the studies, many. There are dozens and dozens of studies out there that demonstrate a clear association between guilt, combat, and suicide. The earliest one I know of is 1991. The Veterans Administration of the United States studies Vietnam veterans, and it finds that the best predictor of suicide in Vietnam combat veterans is combat-related guilt, moral injury. Right, and we've seen this. There was a one study I think probably most maybe authoritative. It was a meta-analysis. They looked at I don't know, 20 studies that examined this. They threw one out because the study was not, the methodology wasn't right. But all the other studies, whether it was 15 studies, 14, or 19, whatever number was, but it was clear that, look, there's a clear link. And this is the reality of killing. This is the effects of killing. This is what it does to people to go someplace and to kill a stranger. It's not the same as self-defense. This isn't somebody breaks into your home and you kill them while defending your family. This is entirely different. And it's desire not to kill has always been there. And again, this is why militaries train. This is why the Romans did it. It's why the Greeks did it. This is why militaries train. This is why the United States military, when it young man or now woman goes into the infantry, whether in the Army or the Marine Corps, they will spend, say they go into the Marine Corps, they will spend 13 weeks in what's called recruit training. Then they'll go for another 8 weeks, I believe, for infantry training, and then they'll go to their unit, and all they will do is train to kill their entire time. So it's a conditioning to get past that hesitation to kill. And then, of course, when that Marine or soldier is released from military duty, they're put out into the world where that conditioning hasn't been undone. And so another aspect that causes the distress, that causes the dissonance, that causes very severe mental, emotional, and spiritual issues. And so it is. I mean, within the United States, you see veterans killing up themselves at very, very high rates. And particularly when you correlate that with service in combat, the rate is excessively high. Uh, and of course, the American government doesn't put out the information like it should. So the last time we had data that clearly showed this from the Veterans Administration directly, as opposed from studies being done. But just the data they put out in their annual suicide data reports was 10 years ago. But at that point, you could see that if you were a young man who had been in Iraq or Afghanistan, you had your the odds of you being killed by suicide were 6 to 10 times higher than your peers, than your friends who didn't go to Iraq or Afghanistan, who didn't join the military. So it's very clear that the a destructive force of war doesn't end, when the soldiers return home or the guns fall silent. And this goes back to the quote adage attributed to Plato, I believe, that only the dead have seen the end of war.
It's a very sad situation, and this is happening at a very large scale, especially in imperial nation states like the U.S. Because empire becomes an end in itself somehow, right? And
Right.
I mean, so much for all the talk of liberty and pursuit of happiness and so on. When you have a large-scale machine like the U.S. military, which destroys men and women by the I don't know, tens or hundreds of thousands each year.
Mm.
Right. So, well, yeah. What can you tell us about that between all this? It's propaganda, right? We talked about propaganda last week.
Yeah.
Isn't it also propaganda of like making people believe that they live in a great country and it does good around the world and blah blah blah, and then they find themselves being trained for 15 20 weeks to be turned into killers, and then of course they will be sent to the killing fields, and
Yeah.
if they come back, even if they are alive, physically alive, inside they are somehow completely dead, right? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, so that's that's what occurs is at some point there is a realization that the people who are fighting us are no different than us. That if I was a young man here in Iraq or Afghanistan, yeah, I might not agree with the resistance leadership or the insurgency leadership or the former government or anything like that, but I certainly wouldn't be okay with occupation forces here. And then as soon as things start happening, I have to say this about the evolution of the Pakistani Taliban, say, in what was the northwestern frontier province, as it was called then. And, the Pakistani Taliban, you can kind of visualize it as every village had their guy, just like everybody does, every town does. You got those people who are always talking about things, and always, so you had these people talking about, these men talking about, the evilness outside of this region and how it's going to come here one day and we have to fight it and everything. And you say, okay, whatever. And then the drones start showing up overhead, and then the Pakistani army comes in, and now there's checkpoints. And then you heard about somebody next village over, their kids being killed by a drone. And then your mom and your sisters come home and they're shaken up because they're humiliated at a checkpoint by by soldiers from the Punjab, right? I mean, like you see how that builds, and all of a sudden, that guy who lived at the edge of the village there, or down the end of the street, he's starting to make a lot more sense now. I mean, so there is that type of realization that occurs, and it's the same process would occur then for an occupying force. And there's a apocryphal story. If people remember, about 15 years ago, Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick put out a documentary on the untold history of America or something like that, and really excellent and recommend it to people. And there is a story that the DVD discs were being shared around a Marine battalion in Afghanistan, and that it became a crisis. That the Marines were watching this and saying, "Is this right? Is this true? Are what we doing here? Is this all connected?" I mean, because, watching a bit about the Mexican-American War and realizing that, wait, this war was about taking territory from Mexico. It wasn't about of what happened at the Alamo. Ulysses S. Grant really described it as the greatest crime of the century, and he's someone who dealt with moral injury from that. Grant, you look at his life, particularly presidency and afterwards, and you see a degree of depression as well as physical effects of what either a traumatic brain injury would do or moral injury and PTSD would do. But you see, there's a story that they had to go and seize all the DVDs from these Marines because it was causing a problem. And you have that. You have this conditioning, as I was saying, but then also too, you have the American educational, cultural, entertainment media that tells the narrative that the empire is a benevolent one, that magnificent, that is magnanimous, right? That this is an empire, if you want to call it that, unlike any other. Or our intentions are good. Maybe things don't work out that way, but our intentions are good. And so you have that as well. Then when it's the realization that the people that we are fighting are no different than us. I would be doing the same thing if I was in their place, as well as then this larger understanding of this is all based on a lie, and these aren't the first guys to lie about war, right? And so you have that type of construct then that is able to be dismantled. And very often that happens. And it usually doesn't happen for American veterans until they're out of the military. Because when you're in the military, you're in a bubble, right? You're part of a team, you're working together, you're on a mission, and there's really not a lot of time to think about those bigger picture things, right? As well as to kind of analyze and reflect on your own personal involvement. And you keep those things closed behind doors. But when you're out, when you're out of the military, you're no longer in that bubble. And so it's a lot easier for those doors in your head to get open, as well as to be exposed to other things, right? And you're more willing to get, right. So this is why you see in the veterans community a great degree of dissatisfaction with the American wars. The last poll I saw along these lines was from the fall of 2021. So following the Taliban victory in Afghanistan and the American retreat from Afghanistan. And so it may have been, the poll may be higher because of that recent event. But I believe it was consistent with other polling that about 70% of Americans who took part in the Afghan and Iraq wars are opposed to them, thought they were mistakes, thought they were wrong, thought they, whatever the question was. But I mean, so a greater percentage, not by much, because most Americans feel this way about the Iraq and Afghan wars now, but a greater percentage of American veterans who took part in those wars had a higher higher numbers of them disagree with those wars than civilians that are people who didn't take part in those wars. So, I mean, you could see that, and that's of course very dangerous for the American empire. And you could see that in a present case with the U.S. military dealing with a personnel crisis, with a recruiting crisis. They did okay this year, but only because they played with their books and fudged the numbers, I believe, and did some things to. But the fact is that the United States doesn't have enough sailors to sail its ships. And so this idea that we're going to somehow build out a 350 ship navy, who's going to sail them? We don't have the sailors. And the same thing too. The Army is the smallest army it's been since before the Second World War, and they continuously fail to make their numbers in terms of bringing in the number of recruits they need, to the point that they now have issued waivers for all sorts of things. And the lowest level of recruits, Category 4, which the Army, if you go back a couple of decades ago, would say they would never, ever consider, are being brought into the Army. So you have recruits going into the Army who have physical issues, who have mental issues, emotional issues, criminal issues, and so so you get to this point where, say, you get back to the Navy and you have a $15 billion aircraft carrier. Well, how good can that aircraft carrier be if you don't have competent and bright and capable people able to staff her, right? I mean, so this has an effect on the empire, that's one more aspect of the American empire's continual deterioration, is that the lies of the empire, the wars that were built on lies, ultimately undermine the empire itself. Right. So it's a cautionary tale, but it's a tale that I think, again, you could apply to other empires around the world. I'm sure it would match up a bit with the Brits and the French and others.
Exactly, absolutely. It's yeah, like you said, it's unnatural for a human, for a normal, if I may say, human to go around and kill people, especially for no good reason.
Yeah.
If you're defending yourself, maybe, but just yeah, for those fake imperialist excuses, of course, sooner or later people will realize the huge mistakes they made, and yeah, it will cause moral injury. And yeah, the lowering of the thresholds and the waiving of conditions for recruitment and things like that. This is all very classic. I know it happens in France. It's been happening for a few years in France, not in the military. Probably it's happening in the military, but I know there's been studies that show that it's happening in the police, in the French police,
Ah,
because yeah, people don't want to join the French police for several reasons. And yeah, they are just recruiting anybody really with the lowest school scores. So yeah, it attracts sociopaths and people with lots of problems,
right.
which worsens things actually, like you say.
Right.
Indeed, it's like a negative feeding loop.
Right.
Absolutely,
We,
and
we, we have the same with the police here in the United States as well, to the
right.
point that many groups that were arguing and fighting against police violence were citing this as well, is that we need good people to go into the police. We don't want the police to become a refuge for the worst, right? And so that's one of an issue here as well, as just like you said, with in France, I guess the same thing. It gets to the point where the police are so disliked, the policies are so abhorrent that good people won't take part in it. And then, of course, then what happens? And it becomes this, right, continual devolution, this downward spiral. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And regarding the propaganda, one thing that I mean, I'm not a U.S. citizen. That I've never even been to the U.S. once. And when I see in the U.S. how many people have been conditioned into, I mean, if they meet even at the supermarket or wherever, they meet some veteran, they feel compelled to say thank you for your service, right? So isn't this part of the propaganda through
It
the
is.
conditioning of people that they feel compelled to say that, and probably the veteran will be happy to take that because he or she is dealing with so many problems. They will be happy to take whatever they find.
No, no, I mean a lot. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a poll done or a study, but anecdotally, I could tell you that most of us are, and even those who are not in the anti-war communities in general, most are not comfortable. Many are not comfortable. I shouldn't say most. Many are not comfortable with receiving the thank you for your service, which is obligatory in the United States. So veterans in the United States, because of the propaganda, right? Decades long propaganda. Again, through all tiers, all levels, education, the media, Hollywood, politics, etc. People have been conditioned to have this clerical-like reverence for the military. So it's a religious institution in the United States in many ways. And so the obligatory thank you for your service is ritualistic. It really is. And people will apologize to you. I mean, even if like at the end of the conversation they find out that you're a veteran, they will say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. oh, I apologize. I didn't thank you for your service." Right? They will apologize. I mean, it's really, and many of them do it because it's obligatory. And there are times when I'm not in the most pleasant mood. And I've said to people, like you said, at the supermarket checkout, they'll say it to you or whatever. They'll say to you, thank you for your service. And I've had times where I said, please don't. I just took part in organized murder. And they will say back, thank you for saying that, because that's how I feel about it. But I felt that, right? I mean, like, I feel like I'm required to say that. I didn't want to insult you. It is. So there is this religious like deference to the American military. Now, one thing that's interesting, and I don't know if you've seen this, Mehdi, is that we have the TikTok ban occurred today in the United States. So when I logged, I don't use TikTok too often, but when I do go on to TikTok today, I went and checked it out. There's a little banner that comes up that says TikTok is now banned. You can't use it today. And then it says, though, however, we are hoping that the Trump administration will fix this, so 170 million Americans today on their phones opening TikTok, because that's what we believe, about 170 million Americans out of 340, so half the country uses TikTok, right? That they are now reading a message today being that TikTok is shut down because of Biden, and we hope that Trump is going to fix it, right? I mean, Trump couldn't have hoped for this to work out better for him. But anyway, one of the things about this, the blowback, if you will, of this is that Americans, millions, the thing I saw at the end of last week, so several days old by now, had said 3.5 million Americans had already downloaded the Chinese app Red Note, which is equivalent to TikTok in some ways, right? I mean, so it's the top loaded all last week. The most downloaded app on the Apple App Store was Red Note. And so you see the blowback there. And another one, Lemon 8, I think is another one. So you have that blowback in the sense that people are, okay, I can't use this app owned by a Chinese company. I'm going to go and use this one instead, but then you have uh, uh, the what was occurring, and you're seeing these stories getting posted on X and other about the interactions that are occurring, because Red Note is essentially a Chinese app in the sense that it's utilized by Chinese. And now you have all these Americans coming into it, and there are all these stories about the interactions, right, that are occurring, the conversations, the dialogue, which is fantastic. But you keep seeing these things being posted, these screenshots of people in China asking Americans about what the United States is really like, particularly with healthcare. And you see these screenshots of Chinese users asking American users, is it true that you have to pay for an ambulance? Is it true that it will cost you, you can go bankrupt if you have a health condition? Or is that just propaganda from my government, right? So you see a good, healthy distrust of their government, which everyone should have, right? You're having this intersection or this dialogue occurring, which is really helpful, but which is what the empire does not want. So you have this blowback, this banning of TikTok, whereas it actually driving Americans closer to understanding the Chinese and further separating themselves from their government, further distrusting it, further seeing, and unfortunately, with this advert for Donald Trump that's now on TikTok for 170 million people to read as soon as they open their app, because they're all opening it. I mean, almost, I shouldn't say all, but most are probably opening it today, seeing if it's going to work, and they're going to read this. And so now you've got a further distrust of government and a greater appreciation for what Donald Trump may or may not do. And that's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. This idea of Trump as an outsider, or his first campaign, he was going to drain the swamp, and that he is, it gets back to this idea of whether or not he's an imperialist. And absolutely he's an imperialist, just in a different vein. And the same thing, is he an authoritarian? Is he a fascist or fascist-like? Absolutely. So it's, you see these things occurring that, again, just like the situation in the Middle East, here in the U.S., things aren't heading in the right direction, to put it politely.
It's quite terrible, and it's going to cost a lot, not just for the US, for the rest of the world,
Right, right,
particularly maybe. And yeah, I appreciate that you mentioned that this propaganda thing of thanking veterans for their service is a cultish thing, and indeed, it's exactly what I was going to say. And I've had the pleasure to interview Yanya Lalich, who is one of the greatest cult experts in the world,
Mm,
and yeah, she said how inside cults, you people are conditioned to engage in rituals which have zero meaning at all. But
right,
yeah, the more they engage into these meaningless rituals, the more they are conditioned, and they will be more and more obedient. And with time, they will be like completely empty inside, and they will lose all of their free will. They will become like
right,
robots at the
right.
hands of of the guru or whoever has control of the cult. I wanted also to ask you, Matt, about another aspect of imperialism, which is the effect of imperialism on the on the receiving end. I mean, on the people who are at the receiving end of imperialism, because these people are thrown off their natural path, right? Because people's groups of people, they like a person, they evolve, right? They evolve through time, and maybe they make mistakes, and then they should learn from them, and so on, and they should choose their own path as a people, which doesn't have to be the same as other people's. But imperialism and colonialism, they push these peoples, which can be millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions even each time, off this natural path. And I was talking about this a little bit with Eyal Sivan, who was born in who is a filmmaker who was born in Israel, and he did many documentaries on Israelis and Palestinians. And in one of his documentaries, he interviewed and he followed some Palestinians who were displaced in the 1948 ethnic cleansing. And they were displaced, if I remember correctly, near the Jordan border or behind the Jordan border. And these people, they were like stuck in time, meaning they didn't even bother to build a house like a real house, meaning, you know, they were in these temporary shelters and so on, because their mind was back home in Palestine, you know. So they couldn't move on, even after 10 years, 15 years, they were stuck in time. So did you see something similar in your experience in Iraq, in Afghanistan, or even afterwards, what you heard from maybe people that you had met back then, years after? So yeah, have you observed some similar phenomena of how imperialism really pushes peoples, all these peoples, from their natural path of evolution, and maybe throws them in some sort of limbo where they get stuck?
Yeah, I think you do see that, Mehdi, in the sense that that foreign presence, the occupation, the war, it causes people to I don't to retreat. I don't want to say retreat, to go back into their own customs, their own traditions, their own culture, to seek protection in that, or solace, or meaning. Fine, right? I mean, so a foreign force is introduced, and that occupation causes people to further bind with their own communities, right? They find protection in that. Again, they find solace, they find comfort, they find meaning in that. And so I think as well too, the most reactionary forces are the ones that then benefit from the occupation. So very often it's those who are the most nationalist, most ideological, the most religious that benefit from the support that is given to them because of the occupation. So I would say what I saw happen in Iraq when I got to Iraq in beginning of spring of '04, and I got up to Crete, Iraq in June of '04. Prior to that, I was in Baghdad. But when I got there beginning of June, and I'll go to the provincial council meetings and everything, and people were still dressed Western, you know, suits and ties, and dressed as they have been dressing in Iraq in those positions for decades, and also too a heavy presence of women. Right, still women members of the provincial council. You do whatever work you're doing, and there be Iraqi women involved in it. And then as the occupation deepened, the resistance to the occupation grew, the insurgency grew in strength, and then the more reactionary elements, because they're the ones that particularly had, in Iraq's case, they're the ones who had the most outside support coming from, say, the Saudis and whoever. You saw suits and ties being replaced by dish dashes, right? And you saw less and less women in places. So I think that foreign presence it causes exactly what you're talking about. It causes people to go back. And I don't mean that pejorative sense, but that's where the support is. That's where there is something to counter the occupation, to counter the encroachment of the imperialism. And and this is we talked last time about the four different, I think, lines of imperial effort, right? Military, economic, political, and ideological, or religious, or information. And I remember the first time I ever really kind of encountered this was I was in Brunei. I was in the Marines, and this would have been the spring of 2001. And it was in Brunei. And I remember walking, and they had the Grand Mosque there, the Great Mosque. And right in front of me is a woman and her son. And she had an abaya on, and he was wearing a Kobe Bryant jersey. Los Angeles Lakers, right? And I mean, and so for me, this is 2001. I was 20, how old was I? 27 years old, maybe, or something, so fairly young. But seeing that, right? Yeah, the
Contrast.
contrast. Thank you very much. The contrast, but also understanding where could that contrast go to, right? These colliding of worlds, or God help me for saying this, but the clash of civilizations, as Sam Huntington described it, right? So you could see that though, right? But very often, you see that in conflicts throughout societies, and you could say that is what in the United States, even in the United States, you could describe that as the red-blue divide, and that's a conservative versus progressive. It's traditional versus modern. It's rural versus urban, right? So there are always these fault lines and divisions within societies around the world that oftentimes you can put into two camps. And when one side, particularly an imperial side, then comes in, and if an occupier comes in and pursues a divide and conquer strategy, then you see that as well. It further enforces that embrace of the traditional, of the conservative, of the nationalist, what have you.
That was yeah, a great observation, Matt. This is exactly what I mean. This is what I don't know how they call it in English. Maybe dialectics. It's a
Yeah,
dialectical thing. One pushes one way, and the other one, of course, pushes the other
yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
dialectic, like in Marxism. So
Right, right.
yeah, things work in a dialectical manner with for humans. Okay, Matt. Well, that was great. I don't know if you wanted to add something in particular.
I think nothing more than we have the Trump administration coming in tomorrow, and I think you probably said this last time as well. This idea of Gaza as prologue, this idea of Gaza as the opening chapter. I'm very afraid that that's the case. That the genocide we witnessed in Gaza was just the foreshadowing of what's to come. And I think you have the personalities in place, you have the desires, the ambitions, you have the needs of a failing empire, you have all of that greed and desperation, and as well too in the last, particularly say 6 months, the success, we can call it that, of the Israelis, that might makes right. That really worries me as to what's coming.